Hello friends, welcome to another color along. If you're new here, my name is Melanie and I am the Swimming Owl. I am an illustrator and I create whimsical coloring books and picture books, and I also design cozy cottagecore inspired products for my small business. I decided it was about time we had a flip through and color along inside my second illustrated book, Whimsical Woodland. I have actually illustrated 5 coloring books so far, but this book has been by far my most popular and best-selling book, so I knew it was well past time that I did a color along with you guys inside this book. This coloring book is like taking a slow, cozy walk through a magical woodland that's filled with so many darling moments, peaceful little nooks, and tons of enchanting scenes. I am a one-woman show, like truly a small business, so I plan, illustrate, design, and self-publish my coloring books all by myself. And my approach to illustrating coloring books is to create them with a lot of intention and to make sure that I provide a wide variety of illustration types for you colorists as well. So that means there's going to be highly detailed images and also more simple images that will provide a quick and easy win when you complete them. I want to make sure I provide images that can suit the various moods we all go through when we color. Sometimes we really feel like digging our toes in and working on something for a few days, and then other times we just need something more simple and relaxed that we can complete in one evening. By the way, you may occasionally hear my bird. Her name is Promise, so you can just say, "Hey Promi," whenever you hear that little squawk. The other thing worth noting about my coloring books is that in the front you will always have practice pages and color testing sheets to test out your materials and color palettes on, and the illustrations will always be single-sided, so you'll never have to worry about ruining a coloring page or having to choose between two if you're using a marker or you don't want indentations. Like, they're always going to be single-sided. So you just need to tuck a piece of cardboard or some paper in between your pages when you color, and you will be all set to go. So if the Whimsical Woodland Coloring Book looks like a good fit for you or a loved one that likes to color, you can find this coloring book on my website, in my Etsy shop, or even on Amazon. Books from my website or Etsy shop are always signed by me, and I always send a few extra special goodies and personal touches. I also just started offering the full download of the book in my website or Etsy shop. So if you like to print books out yourself on your own paper, or you like to color digitally, that option is perfect for you and it gets to you immediately. Books on Amazon are going to be the fastest delivery and the more affordable option, especially for my international coloring friends. So all of the links to shop the book will be below for you. Lastly, if you just want to get a single download for the page that I'll be coloring today, you can also buy the single download of the fox and butterfly in my Etsy shop as well. So you've got lots of options, and like I said, you can find those links below. Alright, let's get to coloring. I decided for today I was going to start my coloring page with my Ohuhu alcohol markers. This is a new way of coloring for me because up until probably about a month ago, I was under the impression that using alcohol markers inside of my coloring books, because they are KDP paper, was outside of the possibilities, which could not be further from the truth. I am so delighted to discover that I can use these markers in my coloring book. So that's kind of how I've been coloring lately. I put down a base of alcohol marker and then come back over the top with my beloved mishmash of colored pencils and a little bit of white ink or a white acrylic paint marker. So what I'm doing here is planning out my marker colors. That way, if you do have these and you want to follow along, you will have this reference here of which markers I'm using. But please don't feel that you have to follow this perfectly or at all. Make it your own. This is just for anyone who likes to have exact color names. So what you can do is go ahead and pause the video and screenshot this, or grab your colors right now with this on pause. The next thing you're going to see me do is tuck this piece of cardstock or cardboard basically between my coloring pages. This is something I send with all of my coloring books from my website or my Etsy shop. And it is a nice tool for you to have, especially if you're using alcohol markers. You tuck this between your pages and you will not ruin anything beneath it. So very handy. All right, so let's dive in and start coloring. I'm starting with my background with a very pale, kind of buttery yellow color. And I am gonna go ahead and put this in really lightly. And to be honest, I am not super careful about my edges because I'm trying not to be a perfectionist. But one thing I definitely have learned when using alcohol markers in these books is that if you can sort of avoid the edge or the line art by just a little bit, it allows for the movement of that alcohol marker to fill in the space without bleeding over an edge. Now, this is very hard to do in super tight spaces, and so again, that's where that mindset of it doesn't have to be perfect comes into play for me. And at the end, it's also where my colored pencils sort of correct things that might bother me. I can use the colored pencil to go back over any edges or kind of sharpen things up a little bit if I need to. I also decided to go for this cozy, glowy afternoon sort of light with this kind of ambery glow, but I think it would be really interesting to see if anybody wanted to go more nighttime and undo a darker background. I would love to see what that looked like. So if anybody tries to tackle it in that direction, definitely share it on social media and tag me because I want to see what you can do with this page too. So tag me at the Swimming Owl if you color this in and share it. I want to see your really cool work too. I'm learning that I think one of the reasons I really like using these alcohol markers and why I'm okay with them not having like a perfect result for me is because I originally was more of a watercolor artist anyway in the first place, and so I'm used to my materials changing. Like they don't look the same dry as they did when I put them down in the first place. So I'm used to there being a little bit of unpredictability to it, and I'm okay with that and kind of going with the flow of things. And so markers, these alcohol markers can kind of be like that. You're not totally sure how they're going to dry sometimes. There's a little bit of streakiness occasionally. The color changes a lot based from where you started. So when I put it down, it's kind of a dark color and then it dries a lot lighter. So I think I'm used to that from watercolor and I'm okay with it. However, I can see how this might be a little nerve-wracking if you're not used to that and you would prefer colored pencils. Again, no right or wrong when you're coloring. Do it the way that makes you the happiest. I've just been having a lot of fun playing with these and using a different approach to coloring. I think another reason I've been able to jump in like feet first with these alcohol markers is because I have a lot of practice at pushing through what we call the ugly stage of art making. And that's kind of that uncomfortable period we have to sit in where we're starting to put down those first base layers and things are looking a little bit messy, streaky, not really polished. I'm used to sitting in that space for a while and I'm okay with it because I know that the more layers I add, the better things are going to look, and it's okay for things to look not so great in the beginning. So I'm used to that uncomfortable space, but it takes a while to get used to that and to sit in that and push past it. So I totally understand that if that's how you're feeling, if you've tried markers like these and you've given up. Just keep going, push past that point and be willing to layer things because I think that might make a big difference for you. Here's a good example where I started putting down this color for what's usually like that white part of the fox, and I was putting it down and in my head thinking, oh no, this is way too dark, but I had to push past it because it's looking dark, first of all, simply because it's wet and it needs to dry. Second of all, I don't have the surrounding colors down yet, so the deep orangish red color of the fox isn't on yet, and so this color next to the white looks way too dark, right? Because we're seeing the white of the paper. But I had to just keep going, keep pushing past, and I ended up being pretty happy with this color being the whitish part of the fox. The other technique I'm doing is I'm kind of doing these kind of scratchy feather light brush strokes with my marker instead of putting down like a solid color. That way it kind of gives like a fur texture to it. So I'm not doing a thick solid stroke like I did in the background for most parts of it. I'm kind of scratching it in. This is where those testing pages in the front of the book would have come in real handy for me, as if I had practiced this technique on one of those pages previously. However, I just jumped into the coloring page and did it because I apparently like taking risks. However, if you need some time to practice this, definitely flip to the front of the book and use those practice sheets. That's what they're there for. Practice making a fur-like texture in the front of the book before you do it on your actual coloring page. So again, you can practice kind of brushing that in really feather light, kind of scratchy like strokes, and then do the same thing with a different color over the top of it. And if you don't want it to blend too much, then you want to wait for it to dry before you put on that next color. Otherwise, they'll just kind of bleed into each other. If you want them to look more like individual pieces of fur, let it dry and then come back in with that other color. Or let the base of marker dry and then use colored pencil to put your brush or your fur strokes in. And again, you want it to dry before using your colored pencil on the top as well. And now I'm going to switch over to my lighter of my orangey reddish colors and start to brush this in. And this really helps that creamy white color of the fox look much, much better. So I'm starting off with this lighter color, and I'm going to put that all over the rest of the fox and save that slightly darker color just for the shadowy areas or the corners and edges of my fox. And I'm still using that kind of scratchy technique to make it look more fur-like by scratching in very small, quick brush strokes with my marker. And I don't think I mentioned this yet, but this is the brush tip of the Ohuhu markers. I know they've got several different nibs or ends to their markers, and this one has the kind of fine brush tip to it. So you can make very small fur-like strokes or little lines with this tip, which is really nice. My plan for these edges of the fox where the white fur meets up against the orangish fur was definitely to come back in with colored pencil later and add in more texture, because that is one thing I find a little bit tricky, is meeting two different colors on like an edge like this where it's not a perfect boundary. So it's fur meeting fur. So I definitely needed to come back in with colored pencil to make that look a little more natural and not just like a solid weird boundary line. Some people might be okay with that though if you have more of a bold, simple style. I wanted it to be a little bit softer, so you'll see the colored pencil effects later at the end. Alright, so at this point I'm going to let us go ahead and just color along to some music for a little bit here as I finish up most of the fox's fur, and then I'll come back to you in a few minutes when we move on to a different area. Alright, so I went ahead and made this switch over to my slightly darker color now, and I am starting on the fox's head because that area should be much more dry than the bottom area. And I'm just going to lightly kind of feather this in to some edges and more shadowy areas, give it a little bit more of a fur texture, and darken in some of those areas where there would be shadow or less light touching it. And I probably could have given this a little bit more time to dry before jumping into adding this color, but like I said, all it means it's going to do is it's going to blend in a little more instead of staying like those little fur strokes that it looks like right now. It will blend in a little bit because it is still a bit damp. Moving on to the trees, I'm doing the same approach where I start with the lighter of my two colors that I chose for these tree trunks, and I'm going to put that into the entire trunk and the branches, and then I'll come back in with my darker color to add some of those really fun bark-like details and textures. And you can also do the same thing with the color that I'm using right now. Once the first layer dries, I can come back in with a second layer of it to also add in a little bit more shadow and texture with the same color, which is the same thing that I did on the fox as well. Trying to carefully color around these leaves on the trunk was definitely not very easy, but again, that's where I decided it's okay if I go over the lines a little bit. I'll correct it later with some colored pencil. It's not a big deal. Let it be, let it go, just color and have fun. And here I also was switching back and forth between following the textures of the tree bark, so like following that knot like circular motion there, and then going back to the up and down movement I was doing. I feel like changing that up a little bit also helps with creating some texture and not making it perfectly flat with those alcohol markers. And now I have switched over to my darker brown color to put in these shadows and more texture in the knots in the trees. Another color that could have been kind of fun for some of these shadowy areas, even on the fox, would have been kind of like a more reddish brown or even a purpley red maroon color. That could have also made a really pretty shadowy color. I often like to put purples and blues in my shadows, so if you had a marker that was in that range, that could be fun to play with too. And again, you could test it out in the front of the book first before putting it into your actual coloring page, but I think that would be something worth trying. And now I'm switching over to putting in the grass in the background and the plants and leaves. And my approach here was to put more of a cool green, so greens that had more blues to them in the background, and then warmer greens with more yellows to them in the foreground. That helps create a little bit of depth to the coloring page without getting too complicated about color and color theory. I wanted to keep the cooler colors behind and warmer colors in the front. And I don't stick to this perfectly because I don't go for absolute realism, but it's just kind of a little bit of a guideline that I give myself when trying to choose colors and have it make sense to me. As I color more with my alcohol markers, I am feeling more and more inspired to create a more simple coloring book that has larger spaces for using marker, or for people that prefer a larger print and easier to color coloring book. So I'm very excited about my next coloring book, which will be perfect for this kind of coloring, or for people that prefer, like I said, the larger print. It's going to be very cute. It's going to be a square format this time, which is different from all of my other books, and I'm really excited about it. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully I'll have that ready come spring 2025. And right about here is where it came in handy that I had mapped out my colors and written things down and had not put away my supplies yet when I realized I had forgotten that branch right there. And be honest, did you guys notice I had forgotten that earlier? Because it took me all the way until finishing the last leaf when I was like, wait, I missed a piece here. So that worked in my favor that I had those colors planned out and written down so I could go back to it when I needed it. I am very rarely that organized when doing my coloring pages. Normally it's just kind of a free-for-all, grab whatever I want, leave the mess, not plan any of it out, and just hope for the best. Another idea that's coming to me now, of course, that this is all done, is that I probably could have taken this light green that I'm using right now and covered the entire ground, including those fussy green leaves that I already painstakingly put in a little bit at a time. I probably could have just put this light green down over the entire thing, waited for it to dry, and then come back in with that darker green on the leaves and felt like it didn't need to be so precious. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have needed to be so careful around the edges of things if there was already like a base of green down. And so I think think I might try that in the future for these areas where there's like a lot of tight detail and just see what happens, because why not? So after adding in all of that kind of pastel light green color all over the ground and some of the grass, I then switched over to my darker warm green color to start putting in some of those other grass shapes and some more shadowy areas. So at this point, I am struggling a bit with how I want to tackle these foreground leaves. I'm trying to decide, do I go with one color and layer it up? Do I put down that base of that pastel green and then add something over the top? What do I want to do here? So the first approach I was taking was putting down the light pastel green color so that that could act as a highlight, and then I was going to come back over the top with a darker color or a second layer, and then eventually here I decide, you know what, just put this color over the entire leaf shape and go from there. Give myself a base to work from. And this is that kind of that same idea I was saying before, where I kind of wish I had put this down over the entire ground, including over the top of the tiny leaves. And so here's where I do kind of try that technique here and then layer in another color over the top. And now I am moving on to the butterfly, which proved to be kind of tricky due to the amount of detail and how close together all of the line art is on this little butterfly. It might have been easier to just go to colored pencil on this, but I stuck with the marker and I put down a base of marker and then ended up covering it up quite a bit with colored pencil and some white acrylic marker, which I ended up being a little bit more happy with than just the marker on that. I think part of my problem with the butterfly too was my color choices. I think I should have gone even more pastel with the marker colors and then added in more dark color with colored pencil later. That is, again, one of the things about these markers is sometimes the colors just don't come out the way you're envisioning. Even if you test them on the paper and, in a swatch first, things can change quite a bit. Alright, so at this point I am making this switch over to my colored pencils to start adding in more of those details, cleaning up some of the edges, polishing things up, also bringing the fox to life by putting in his eyes and nose, and at the end you'll really see it pop once I add in the little white sparkles in the eyes and on the nose. That helps so much, but also just adding in more texture and layering things up and pushing past that stage of this isn't quite how I want it to being, yes, this is one of my artworks, one of my coloring pages. This feels like something I made now. So it feels like it all kind of gets brought together and wrapped up in the final 10 to 15 minutes of my artwork. That's where it feels like it becomes my artwork, if that makes sense. I think it could be really interesting to take a coloring page and color it 3 or 4 different ways and see what you like the best, especially if you're still trying to find what you would consider your style or your process. I prefer saying your process over your style, really, because your style can change, but maybe the process and the way you lay down your materials or what materials you want to use can really be made into your own. And so I think it'd be interesting to take the same page and to do it 3 or 4 different ways and see how they turn out, find out what you like about each one, what you don't like, and then apply the things that you did like to your future coloring or artwork. I think it's a really good practice to find the things that make you happy in your art making process. So I have done this page digitally, so I've colored it digitally in Procreate, and now I've done it with marker and colored pencil. I think it would be interesting for me to do it again, and this time do just colored pencil and see if I like that better, or if I really do like the process of combining the alcohol marker with colored pencil. So it might be something for you to try, just an idea for you. And if you're wondering, well, Melanie, how am I supposed to get a copy of this coloring page? Just so you know, when you buy my coloring books, I am more than okay with you making copies for yourself or like your immediate family in your own home. That is more than okay with me. So feel free to make a copy of your page before you color it and give yourself some options. You can also get single downloads of a lot of pages in my shop. So that is totally okay with me for you to be making copies so that you can enjoy the coloring page more than once. And here is where I add in one of my secret little colors. I love to pop in some turquoise or aqua into my pages and artwork because it is a color that makes me so happy. So even if it shouldn't really belong in these spaces, I don't care. I'm putting it in anyway because I love it. And then finally, for the magical details and sparkles, I am getting out my little acrylic white pen here, and I'm going to tap in some of the final details. And here it's really interesting with these white acrylic pens. Based on what you're putting it on top of, it will behave differently. So on this butterfly, I had some colored pencil in those purple areas, and the white acrylic paint picks up some of that color and absorbs it and turns it pink instead of white, which I'm not sure if you'll actually be able to see in the final images or not, but just kind of interesting, something to watch out for in case that might bother you. And then I think it also happens a little bit on the fox, like on his cheek, because I put in a little bit of a purpley color into the shadows on the fox at one point, and so it turns it kind of a pinky color, and I tried to get rid of it, but again, going with the flow, it's okay. Tapping in some more sparkles, and then this also, by tapping this into the eyes and on the nose, brings this fox from dead in the eyes to alive, and so precious. Look at that. Look how much cuter the fox is all of a sudden. So highly recommend tapping in a little bit of white onto the eye and the nose. And here we go. It's all finished. So enchanting and fun, and I hope you colored with me today and got a little bit of art making relaxing time. Thank you so much for being here with me, and I hope to see you again next time.